I'm with Guy Nohra. Our guest today is Ray Alexander, who is retired Navy SDS2, and you're going to have to explain to us what that means at some point.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Ray has served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. So first of all, thank you for your service in all these places.
It was my honor to serve, sir.
Our show is really for, our title kind of speaks for itself. It's for people who are want to learn, but they're so busy living life that they don't have time, like you and I, to spend time on some issues that might appear to be very specific. However, they're incredibly intellectually curious and they want to learn. And in this case, with today, obviously with what's happening, Israel, Iran, and of course our own preparation, I think your background is perfect for that, to help explain what I think are the unsung heroes behind war. People like me and normal people, all we see is airplanes and cannons and artillery and infantry and so on. We have no idea what someone like you does.
Yes,
And your role is crucial. Nothing happens without people like yourself. So to me, I'm honored that you're here, and I can't wait to hear have our conversation about specifically we're going to end up with Iran and Israel, of course, but also I'd like to hear about the U.S. preparation. But before I do that, I'm a huge exponent of the American dream. It sounds like that's your life.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'd love
trying to make it happen.
I love to hear, growing up, single mom, and here you are, incredibly successful, have done a great job, good family, blessed. So please tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey, I call it, and then we're going to dig right into the logistics piece and how you ended up here. By
Yes,
the way,
sir.
I'm a venture capitalist, and I've hired hundreds of people in my life. Whenever somebody's been in a submarine, serving in a submarine, they're in.
Well,
Because I could never do that. Okay.
you
There
probably
go.
give us far too much credit because there's some real jokers on submarines, but I'll take it.
Okay.
I'll take it.
I'd love to hear it. Okay.
Well, first of all, I'm really humbled to be here. I appreciate the opportunity just to have a conversation with you, especially about topics that are so important globally. And I bring only my perspective. Obviously, I can't speak for, although I currently work for the Department of Defense, I can't speak for the Department of Defense,
Of course.
the federal government, the Navy. This is coming from my perspective with my background,
Sure.
both in the Middle East and in the service of the Navy. So giving you, starting at the beginning, I was raised in Rochester, New York, the inner city of Rochester, New York, in the 1980s, 1990s was sort of my childhood. Raised by initially a mother and a father, with an older sister, younger brother. My father, however, struggled with alcoholism and drug abuse. He was paranoid schizophrenic. Unfortunately, it was committed involuntarily 3 times before my mother sort of finally gave up on the relationship and got a divorce. She did her best to raise us, us kids, on a teacher salary. She was a teacher of English to speakers of other languages in the Rochester Public School District. And that sort of background, I sort of raised myself, typical latchkey kid from the 1980s, living in the inner city, kind of just spent my days outside, came home when it was dark, and kind of raised myself. Me and my little brother, a friend of mine from across the street who ended up being a Los Angeles Police Department detective, is now in air support. We all kind of, gelled together through that hardship, went to public schools, walked or took the bus, sometimes the city bus, had a typical, what I thought was a pretty typical childhood based on what I saw happening around me. And didn't consider it a struggle at the time. Looking back, I realize, how different that upbringing was compared to many of my peers, especially when I became an officer in the Navy. My father ended up passing away. We saw him every other weekend, so he was still in our life. Learned what we could from him. He did his best to hold things together while we were with him on the weekends. Loved him for that. Forgive him for the decisions that he made, leading up to the separation. But unfortunately, he passed away from leukemia and I saw that you do some work with leukemia research, which I really sincerely appreciate. He was a gang boss on railroads for Conrail, Confederated Rail, and we think that he was exposed to some chemicals that unfortunately caused him to have leukemia. Sort of that was kind of a formative moment in my life where, having a father pass away when you're 16 helps you focus on what's critically important. I remember walking home from the hospital that day when one memory that I have that sticks with me is attempting to shut my father's eyes while he was on the emergency room table. And it was too late. He was rigor mortis at the time, so I couldn't shut him, which was, I'll never forget that moment. And that has relation to later on in my finding Christ, that in that moment, I believe God was reaching out to me to help me. And on my way home, on my walk home, I remember the thought crystallizing that I should do my best, try to make the best decisions I can and do my best, give my every bit of myself to doing good and to trying to do my best in the world. It sounds somewhat cliched, but it was honest, and it was a 16-year-old kid. So forgive a 16-year-old kid for being cliched.
Not at all. Actually, I really appreciate your openness with us because, everybody has struggles, and it's important that someone like you shares them because it makes the rest of us feel better about ourselves because we're not alone.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
yes, sir. And I think that was a turning point in my life as a 16-year-old. Really turned on academically, turned on in the things that I did. I started working when I was 14, and during that time period, I used to help my mother, who's a wonderful woman, but she lacked certain skills with finances, and so I helped her through some of that when I started bringing in some income into the house, helping her pay the mortgage, getting through high school, and then not really having much guidance. The school counselors in the Rochester Public School District don't do so much helping prep kids for college. It's more trying to help kids who come home, who come to school from a abusive family, or who have to leave the school and go to an abusive family, or who have to fight through the gang life. And drugs were prevalent both in and around, mostly around the school. I had a friend that was shot in the stomach where I went to school. I had another friend that was kicked in the head and rendered unconscious. I spent my time trying to find alternative routes to school and avoiding fights. Got into a few. Definitely didn't equip myself very well. I was a little kid, but I became smart about how to navigate those kinds of challenges. Ended up putting myself through community college. I got an associate's degree in biology, and then went to a 4-year school, State University of New York at Binghamton, and finished my bachelor's degree in science and biology.
So I invest in I was an investor in the life sciences, so biology was a big part of what I was doing. So
yes, sir.
One more thing we have in common here.
Yes, sir. And people sometimes ask me why I took biology, because I didn't end up using it for anything. It's just because I loved it. I found a real connection with it. It really helped me understand both myself and the world. When I was young, in terms of my formative sort of first principles, worldview, or ideological upbringing, which I think is important to any discussion, especially even the bigger discussion that we're going to get into later on. I was raised looking back as a secular humanist. I didn't really understand the term or how I was being raised at the time because I was in it. But both my mom, who claimed to be spiritual, but believed essentially that humans were, people are essentially good, and that we can on our own be moral and ethical, and that there is a sort of shared universalist sense of what's right and wrong. It seemed to make sense to me as a kid, and that's kind of what our school system pushed. The Rochester public school system pushed that sort of secular humanist ideology, and some other things that we see kind of now rearing its head that has been embedded in the culture, sort of anti-Americanism, anti-religion, some very defeatist principles that I think are undermining or became the fertile ground into which many destructive anti-civilizational worldviews have found fertile ground, fertile soil. So growing up there, there were times my mom did bring us. There was another formative moment in my childhood where my mother brought me and my sister and brother in our station wagon to a protest at Fort Hood in upstate New York, where it was a protest against nuclear weapons. Part of my upbringing, in that sort of sense, was that war is a sort of failure of creativity, that it's a failure of leadership or a result of greed, and that if you remove the implements of war, you could minimize or reduce or even get rid of the risk of war. I kind of had an interesting experience too, growing up in Rochester, New York, and going to public schools. I had friends who were Quakers. I had friends who were Catholics. I had friends who were Muslim. I had two very close Jewish friends. Two of my friends that I came through middle school with became converted to Islam. And an interesting thing looking back is I kind of was attracted to the stability of those families, and I was interested in the religious, not from an academic perspective, but just sort of sensing the difference between being in my home, which was a bit unstable and kind of sort of foundationally unstable or destabilizing, and then being in those homes felt so much more comfortable to me, and I connected that with religion. I considered adopting religious principles myself back at that young age. Didn't feel like though I had the depth of knowledge to commit myself to something as important as a religion. I did know it was very important. And I bring that up because that provides me context, provides you context for sort of how I've always sort of approached problems and had tried to gain perspective on the world through first principles and through the ideological underpinnings of problems and of people's perspective.
That's very important. I think that's crucial because again, it's giving us the parameters by which you think, and I think as we go further, that's going to be very important. So thank you
Yes,
for
sir.
that background too.
Yes, sir. So on the issue of war, as a young man, I had the normal masculine inclination to explore and adventure, to do things like that. And on one of my self-funded adventures, I won't go into the details of it, but I had an epiphany that sort of along the lines of removing the implements of war and making war less likely, I just did a simple exercise where I went back in time and thought, well, during World War II, there were no jets, at least there were some at the end, but generally speaking, there were none during World War II, but there was still war. World War I, tanks were first introduced, but there was still war. You keep going back in time, rifled munitions or rifled weapons, were introduced in the 1800s. There was still war before then. And so I believed it was a crystalliz, it was an epiphany where I realized, wait, I've got this all wrong. Human conflict, both interpersonal at a personal level and at scale, are an inevitable part of the human existence. It's unfortunate. Of course, it's unfortunate. It's not ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world and we are not all perfect. So war, I decided, was inevitable. And in that moment, I thought, how critically important is it for me to understand war and war fighting and the military? And so a few months later, maybe 9 months later, I joined the military. My rationale for joining the military was that it was to understand the military mentality, to understand war and war fighting. And part of it was to have a bit of an adventure. I mean, I was a young man, so.
Sure.
So in my time in the military, I'm just going to kind of fast forward through what I experienced in the military, what I went through. I won't go into great detail on a lot of it unless you have questions.
You humbly forgot to mention that when you graduated from SUNY, you were summa cum laude, but that I will add that.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was more just a matter of being passionate about the topic. It's nothing special about me. I'm just a grinder. I'm not particularly intelligent, or I don't really have any unique characteristics. I'm just a regular guy who pushes hard. So yeah, went to State University of New York, and a few years later enlisted in the military. Why did I enlist? That was an important question for the recruiters, because when you go to the recruiter and you have a degree, you can become an officer right away. From my background, though, I didn't feel like I had the right to try to lead in the military as somebody with no military background and really not knowing anything about it. So I enlisted in the military with my degree, which was somewhat unique. in order
How
to be.
could you be how could you be so mature at such a young age? Because what you said is so important.
Well, I don't know. I think it's God, to be honest with you, and
Okay. Okay.
I think He's been with me and guiding me through my life, even though I didn't at the time recognize His existence in my life.
Okay.
Um, from a pragmatic or earthly explanation, I think really just growing up, sort of being an adult from the age of 14 on, and then having to make decisions to protect my family and to protect my friends, I think sort of accelerated my maturity relative
Okay.
to other folks. It did serve me well as a junior enlisted sailor. I helped guide a lot of my shipmates through some struggles that they were facing. A lot of 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds who were first thing out of high school. They had nothing else going on, decided to join. Sorry for the dog in the background. He's
No
downstairs.
problem.
Um, and it helped sort of, I think, helped me understand that while I didn't expect to be fit for military service, I had no background. I expected everybody around me to be cut squared away, square jawed, hairs cut, ready to execute. It turned out I was more ready to execute than a lot of my peers were. No fault of their own. They just I love all my fellow sailors that I went through boot camp with. Some of them a little less than others, but you love your brothers in arms, no matter how much you disagree with them. And so I sort of helped try to focus their energies and put things into perspective for them, and try to help them through the challenges of being a junior enlisted sailor. Eventually, the timing was interesting too, because I went to the submarine, the USS Portsmouth, SSN 707 fast attack submarine out of San Diego was my first operational unit, where I served as a sonar technician. That's what STS is. STS
Okay.
is Sonar Technician Submarines.
Got
And
it.
that was my duty. Had the choice to decide what I wanted to do, and sonar kind of attracted me because I got to listen to the ocean. And with my biology background, I thought that was the coolest thing. And I'm glad I'd made that decision, because it was an amazing experience.
Oh yeah.
We deployed in 2001. We left for deployment about 2 weeks before September 11th. And while we were transiting the Pacific, September 11th happened, and our mission, actually, interestingly enough, our mission didn't change. But a quick note on being on a submarine: when you're transiting long distance, you stay deep. And when you're deep, you have no ability to communicate with the outside world. So
So
when,
For us lay people, sonar, we read about it, we
oh
see it
yeah,
in the movies, but exactly what that entails.
wow, I love the fact that you asked that question. This conversation might go for hours, just so you know, Guy. Uh, so sonar is the sound or acoustic analysis of the ocean around you. Submarines, being underwater, have no ability to see. We can't see anything underwater, so we use acoustics to help us navigate safely through the water. We have various sonar arrays, which are nets of acoustic equipment, hydrophones and transducers. Hydrophones listen, transducers both listen and communicate or send sound. On a submarine, on a fast attack submarine, and also ballistic missile submarines, the main sonar array that we use is called the spherical array, and it's in the very bow of the submarine, the very front of the submarine, shrouded by a fiberglass shroud that makes the submarine kind of hydrodynamic. So it's basically a ball of hundreds of hydrophones. And fiberglass is important because it's roughly the same density as ocean water. So it minimizes deflection of the sound through the material as it hits the hydrophones. And the reason it's spherical is because you need to be able to detect both the azimuth, the angle, vertical angle on the vertical plane, and then the horizontal angle that the sound is coming to the ship. So you can kind of detect roughly where that sound is coming from. And then you do some analyses, both acoustic, through, oral, AURAL, orally, but also through some processing equipment, what type of contact that is. I say contact, sorry for using that term. It's anything that you can hear is a contact. So it's maybe a commercial vessel on the surface, maybe an oppositional submarine, maybe a friendly forces submarine, maybe it's a biologic like a
Of
whale.
course, the famous whales, right?
Absolutely, yes. I love
Everybody
listening to the
talks
whales.
about the
So,
whales.
when you're going through the water off the coast of Hawaii, it is like those old National Geographic slow pans through the jungle of the Amazon, where you're hearing all of the birds and mammals and insects. When you're a kid and you were watching those National Geographic videos,
Yes.
except you're listening to it through headphones while you're transitioning through the water, and it's all dolphins, marine mammals, whales. Crustaceans make a massive amount of sound in the ocean. There are these
Oh,
tiny little shrimp that we call them snapping shrimp, that basically kill their prey using cavitation of their pincers. So they'll cavitate
okay.
the water, they'll create a bubble that kills their prey, and then they'll consume their
Wow.
prey. And that
Okay.
creates this sort of static environment in the background. Just amazing experience.
All right. So you were at September 11. I'm sorry. Thank you,
Yes, no,
though.
no, awesome. September 11th. This is sort of just a side note, but it's kind of interesting because it's different than what most folks experienced on September 11th. And I was in the military. Most folks experienced, came to work in the morning, saw the video, saw the footage. We were all shocked. We realized what happened right away. On the submarine, you go to periscope depth every once in a while. I can't be specific, but you go to periscope depth every once in a while to receive and to communicate. And the news comes across, at least back then in the early 2000s, news came across as headlines, essentially, with a small narrative description of the headline. And it came across as a printout. We would all get the printouts, and they'd be handed around the ship when you're on your watch, and you could kind of catch up on the news. So we got our first indication of September 11th was that an airplane hit one of the World Trade Towers. That was it. That was the headline. That was all we knew. So certain number of hours later, a pretty decent amount of time later, we got a second update. And the second update was 2 planes hit, both towers are down, plane attempted to hit Pentagon. So we started to think, okay, possible terrorist attack. Another period of time passes, and then we have an update from POTUS acknowledging that it was a terrorist attack, with some announcements about the origin of the attack, and then we go back underwater. So we essentially kind of had this developing picture over the course of 18 to 24 hours, where it crystallized to us a unit that was about to be deployed for 6 months overseas, and everything shifted for us. It was a pretty shocking experience. We didn't actually see footage until we pulled into Guam about 4 or 5 days later, where we saw the footage, and we relived it then. 4 or 5 days later, we relived it because we had no real sense of what happened. And you can read through text, and the World Trade Towers fell down. That's an amazing image, or a horrifying image in your own mind. But to actually see it happen, once we hooked up the TVs, the TV feed on the submarine, when we pulled alongside the pier, it was shocking.
Wow.
Interestingly, our mission didn't change. We did some mission related to China at the time. So it was
Okay.
But I can't
Okay.
go into detail on what the
course.
mission was.
Of course. Okay.
After that, I went to officer candidate school. I got accepted to go to officer candidate school. I was picked up as an officer. I was offered a naval flight officer or supply corps officer. That's the Navy's term for a logistics officer. And I never intended to stay in the military for a career. So the shorter period of commitment was supply. So I took the supply officer job, and don't regret it. It's an interesting field, and it led me down some interesting paths. Went through officer candidate school at Pensacola, Florida. It's no longer in Pensacola, Florida. Now it's up in Connecticut, I think, or New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Went to logistics school, went out to Diego Garcia. That's a small atoll in the British Indian Ocean Territory.
Yep.
You're nodding your head, so I assume you know where it is.
Oh, yeah. There's a little bit of action going on there right now.
There is. They are prepping B-2s, possibly prepping long-range bombers out of Diego Garcia. So for your audience, Diego Garcia is a small atoll in the British Chagos Archipelago called the British Indian Ocean Territory. It's about midway between Madagascar and the southern tip of India, about 7 degrees south of the equator. If you drew a line between Madagascar and the southern tip of I'm sorry, I think I said Saudi Arabia. I meant India.
Okay.
The southern tip of India, about 7 degrees south of the equator, is Diego Garcia. And the island it's a military installation. There's nothing else. Half the island is the military installation. Half of the island is an old coconut grove that has become overgrown. Interesting experience out there. We have some pre-positioned military warfighting equipment on maritime vessels, and we run very long-range aircraft missions out of there. It's interestingly, I think the largest airstrip south of the equator, and it was used also as an emergency landing location for the shuttle, for the NASA shuttle.
Okay.
Did a year out there on Diego Garcia. I fought the Navy trying to put me back on submarines, but they won. They pulled me back in. With my background and experience, it's somewhat rare to have an officer both be on a submarine and then be available to go back to submarines. So they put me back on. Was originally scheduled to go to the USS Michigan, which at the time was being converted from a ballistic missile submarine to a guided missile submarine. I won't go into the details unless you're curious about the difference between those two. They were stationed out of Bangor, Washington. But during my training, the supply corps officer on the USS Newport News, fast attack submarine out of Virginia, had some disagreements with the chain of command and was kicked off. And they were about to leave on a deployment in a few weeks, so they shortcut my training and put me on the USS Newport News, SSN 750. That's another fast attack submarine. The difference between fast attack and ballistic missile submarines in terms of quality of life is pretty significant. Submarine life in general is pretty difficult. It's crowded and closed. You're close up against your shipmates all the time. There is no commute time. You sleep where you work. You work where you sleep. The boss can come find you.
Your circadian rhythms are all messed up.
Yes.
Your claustrophobia kicks in if you let it.
Yes.
Amazing. Again, that's why I have so much respect.
Yes. And we could go. So the circadian rhythm thing has always been a point of curiosity for me. And I've never achieved high enough rank to really challenge the policy. But on a submarine, the submarine is such a complex machine that the folks who man submarines, the folks who plan how many people need to go aboard submarines to make it work, make it function. You're living inside of a machine, a nuclear machine, by the way, with its own compartmentalized nuclear reactor. So you are limited by the number of people you can fit on board, and you're competing against how many people you need to do the job. So it's a very one of the things they do to accommodate that is they put the crew on a rotating 6-hour-long watch cycle. Okay, so your circadian clock is roughly 24 hours. But if you're on a 6-hour rotational watch schedule, you may have the 0600 to noon watch, right? Then you have your off time, which you'll use doing normal training, repairing equipment, qualifying on certain pieces of equipment. You're constantly studying on board the submarine. Then you have your oncoming watch period, which in this case would be from 6 to midnight, where you're sleeping. Then you get up and perform your watch again from midnight to 06. And it's constantly working its way back. So you never establish a sleep pattern. Combine that with the normal stresses of submarine operations, combine that with interpersonal challenges. You have people who are constantly sleep deprived in highly stressful circumstances. It is a crucible of self-control. You have to be able to rein in your emotions. You have to be able to control your emotions. And if you don't, you get tossed, which very rarely happened.
Okay.
So spent that tour. I've done two Eastern Pacific deployments. The first one was anti-piracy. The second one was in the Arabian or Persian Gulf, whatever you prefer. So the anti-piracy mission was off the coast of certain countries in Africa, in the Indian Ocean, and then the other deployment was in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, piracy still exists and thriving in certain parts of the world, unfortunately.
It is. We did our best. It was at a time when piracy was particularly intense. So that was a pretty incredible mission as well. Won't go into details unless you wanted this to be 3 hours long. After that mission, I got my first shore tour. So I had somewhat unique, high op tempo first 7 years in the military, boot camp, and then went to an operational unit, officer candidate school, year in Diego Garcia, which was a bit of a reprieve, but it's still an isolated duty where there's no civilian infrastructure. So it's still a challenge for different reasons than a normal shore tour is. You can't build a family, for example. And at that time, I really sort of felt a sense of urgency to build a family, which is another just a footnote why I think Christ has been with me for my whole life is I've always had the urge to have a family. And so I couldn't do it there on Diego Garcia because you'll have to violate certain rules that I wasn't willing to violate to start a family. In a military environment,
Sure.
went back to another submarine and then got my first shore tour. Normally in the military or in the Navy, it's you get a shore tour. It's sort of you'll start out with an operational tour, which is high op tempo, high stress, and then you'll get a little bit of recovery time on a shore tour, which is a couple of years long. It might be an opportunity for you to build a family or to reconnect with your family after your operational tour. Interestingly, I got my first shore tour back in California in Ventura County, Naval Base Ventura County. And about 6 months into that shore tour, I was building a relationship with my then girlfriend. I got involuntarily mobilized to Afghanistan for a year, where I served in Bagram, performing logistics missions for the Combined Joint Task Force 82 or 101 with the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne.
Sure.
Incredible life experience and incredible opportunity to support the troops. I was what they call a FOBIT. I was on Bagram most of my tour. We did battlefield circulation tours, and I did some recon tours in locations where we were planning on building new forward operating bases. But most of my time was on Bagram. So when military members hear each other talking about deployments, especially we pay tremendous respect to the guys who spend most of their time outside the wire. I was not one of them. So I want to make sure your audience understands I will not try to claim credit or even pretend to claim credit for being outside the wire for a significant amount of time.
So one thing that I find interesting in what you said is you were Navy, yet you were in a base. So the services work together in these kind of situations?
They do. At the time, there was a surge in, I think, 2006, 2007 in Afghanistan. And sometimes the services are limited, personnel limited. We have an all volunteer force. So a lot of times they'll pull from subject matter experts in certain fields, and they'll pull them into it. In the Navy, that meant individual augmentation, IA.
Got it.
And in that time, at that time during the surge, they were non-voluntary. To be honest with you, it was non-voluntary. It came across as non-voluntary. I knew it would be non-voluntary, so I volunteered for it. That happens a lot. It's coming, so you volunteer for it. It was the same thing with that second submarine. Yeah, I knew I would get it, so I just volunteered for it.
Preemptive strike.
Yeah, exactly. So spent a year in Afghanistan, and I guess my main takeaway in Afghanistan during that tour was I'd never seen so many different colors of brown and gray. The mountains there are beautiful. The people there are resilient. It was a hell of a fight. And I built relationships with a lot of folks, a lot of Afghans. And, I guess short footnote, I felt terrible about pulling out. I know it's important for us to get out of seemingly never-ending wars. I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And I just think that we did it the wrong way. We invested a lot of blood and treasure to simply pull up chocks and abandon people who we were there to support.
Yep.
And then that leads us to a discussion later on about Iran and about the opposition to our involvement in Iran.
Yeah. So if I may ask you, let's hope it doesn't happen.
Yes.
But if it did happen, how will we logistically prepare for the war? Like, what happens from your perspective? We know obviously troops get moved, the supply chain, so on, but it doesn't happen unless someone like you and your colleagues are the backbone of this whole operation. So how would that play out? And anything that's obviously secret, we don't have to discuss.
Yeah. We'll definitely, I've got a lot of practice avoiding sharing controlled
Of course.
unclassified information or classified information, having been on
Yeah.
submarines for a while. So fast forwarding through to where we are today, I think absolutely ground forces in Iran are highly unlikely, and I think that's pretty widely understood and accepted. So one of my tours, if I may, after I got back from Afghanistan, I started to have a family and transitioned out of active duty into the reserves, and also got a job as a federal civilian working for the Navy in logistics. I deployed a couple more times, as you mentioned, one again to Afghanistan, where I provided logistic support to special operations units, also running them out of Bagram. But I had units spread throughout the theater and also in Europe, where we shepherded special operations forces through. In order to focus their attention on their mission, we basically hoteled and kept care of them so that they wouldn't have to think about anything except for the mission. And then my last tour was in Iraq and then in Saudi Arabia, KSA, Riyadh, where I was. This ties into the question. I was put in charge of I was put in charge of a unit and built a unit. It didn't pre-exist me, so I was put in charge of it to build it out. It's called the Host Nation Coordination Cell in Riyadh, where we had the mission to communicate and coordinate between Saudi ministries, U.S. government activities and military activities, including the embassy and folks in the embassy, and commercial logistics support, also lower level U.S. military units, logistics units, shipping units, to prepare the Trans-Arabian network for shipping. It was interesting. It was at a time when Trump was making tremendous inroads, both in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, and with the Abraham Accords, and finding unity of purpose among these countries, all these neighboring countries. And one of the positive effects of that was that we had more access for shipping military gear and personnel through these countries. We called it in the military the Trans-Arabian Network. One of our biggest concerns was, and I think any of your listeners, even just a small amount of research and thinking about the problem, one of our biggest concerns was if Iran was to become aggressive in the region with their ballistic missiles and with their drones, both waterborne and airborne drones, by the way, if they were to activate their proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and some of their proxies in Iraq, what might happen? And so in operational planning, you plan for most likely and most destructive courses of action, and then you try to prepare and practice to protect or defend against those courses of action. So I was put in charge of this Host Nation Coordination Cell. I spent a lot of time in the embassy. I spent a lot of time in Jeddah. The Islamic port of Jeddah was highly important to us. One of my main missions there was to exercise a Trans-Arabian shipment through the Islamic port of Jeddah to Bahrain, and to use the Saudi road network. And we were able to do it. We moved 300 pieces, but it took a tremendous amount of coordination. And Guy, I never watched the Game of Thrones, but people talk about it. And interacting with the Saudi government must be very similar to the Game of Thrones, because it's so complicated and complex and so influenced by familial and clan relationships, where you've got 22 separate ministries. We dealt primarily with 6 of them, including the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministry of Defense, the National Guard. Those all had their own ministries. And depending on what family you're connected to, you may have a leader of a given ministry who is associated with a certain family or clan, who comes from a certain region. So you may need to go to that region and drink tea to even have a conversation with a certain ministry. It was really a mind-opening or mind-blowing, sort of amazing experience that I had in support of pre-positioning forces, setting up the processes and protocols. You don't think about this; you just think about moving material. But all of these countries have their own, ministries of the interior and trade requirements and approval requirements. So to get 300 pieces of military gear offloaded at the Islamic port of Jeddah, and then used the road system to drive it up to Bahrain. Took a tremendous amount of coordination and relationship building. The goal there was, yes, sir.
It's fascinating because I always I got an opportunity when I was running for governor to do a drive along with the police, and I think it's law enforcement, but in fact, it was all psychology, because really it was most of the night was spent taking care of homeless people that were on drugs and so on. So in your case, you're supposed to move 300 pieces of equipment. However, you're the main diplomat for four ministries and the clans behind them.
Yeah, and I can't claim that I was decisional. I was not decisional, but I built the conversation for the decisional folks. And so we practiced that, and here's why. We were concerned that with Iran, with an aggressive Iran, most damaging course of action would be to essentially launch a ballistic missile attack, not on Israel, but on the west coast of the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, taking out Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, our bases, and taking out a significant amount of the civilian infrastructure, Oman, Western Saudi ports, Eastern Saudi ports. And so we had contingency plans to bring cargo through other alternative networks. And just at the time, there were conversations tangential to what I was doing, but conversations about connecting rail networks from Israel, through Jordan, and directly through Saudi Arabia in order to efficiently move cargo from Mediterranean ports in case the Strait of Hormuz was shut down, in case the Bab el-Mandeb was shut down, the southern entry into the Red Sea,
of course,
in case the Suez Canal was shut down. I mean, we saw maybe it was last year where there was a ship stuck in the Suez Canal. It didn't take much to put one person on a ship and run it into the ground, and bottle up a globally important strategic bottleneck. So we were building worst case scenario. We were building plans against worst case scenario. And by the way, we weren't doing it because we thought we would, because there's folks that will think, hearing what I'm saying, we knew eventually we're going to trigger a war with Iran, and so we were making these preparations. No, that's not how the world works. The U.S. military learned our lesson from the Pearl Harbor attack in World War II, and since then build operational plans for every contingency that you can think of. And so we're kind of constantly actively thinking about adversarial attacks, most damaging, most likely courses of action, critical vulnerabilities, and protecting that. That is the job of the U.S. military in defense of our national interests, and in defense of things that support our national interests, like freedom of navigation of the seas, and freedom of commerce. So interestingly, actually, after the horrible October 7th attack in Israel, I saw, by 2023, I was retired. I retired in late 2021, and moved my family to Oklahoma to raise my kids, and just invest and pour myself into my children and my family. But I'm reading the news, and I'm seeing these signals. Okay, the Houthis got activated. Hamas triggers it. Hamas is not going to trigger such a violent, aggressive attack without buy-in from its Iran, from its sponsor. Okay, so I started looking for, what's Hezbollah going to do? What are the Houthis going to do? One of the things that we planned for on both of my deployments out of Virginia were, how are we going to safely transit the Suez? How are we going to safely transit the Bab el-Mandeb? How are we safely going to transit the Strait of Hormuz? And you think about these problems. And the Houthis, during my time in Saudi Arabia, were actually rocket attacking Riyadh, which was completely underreported. It was wild to me that when I came back, there was significant American sentiment against Saudi Arabia for defending itself against an attack on its sovereignty from a neighboring southern nation. I thought it was mind-boggling. Draw an analogy: if some, say, cartel that owns part of northern Mexico, started launching attacks on Dallas, that cartel would not exist the next day, and there would be no batting an eye about it. So the lack of framing from our media was just embarrassing to me and misled the public. So we started to see things like the Houthis becoming active, launching rocket attacks on Israel, shutting down or contesting the Bab el-Mandeb, exactly what was happening back when I was doing that sort of operational planning. And so the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. But how aggressive is Iran going to become with this activity? And when I think it was Israel did a targeted attack on 2 IRGC generals in Damascus in April of 2024. And that triggered a direct response from Iran. And I thought, this is it. Iran is committed. Iran is pot committed. This is going to be a big problem. But they stopped. I got on some, X groups. I forget what they call them, but, I have some folks on X that I talk to sometimes, and they wanted me to come in and give my perspective. And I was concerned. I thought that we were being too overconfident. Folks were saying, we'll just shoot them all out of the sky. Everything's going to be fine. I was thinking to myself, well, this is sort of a shotgun attack where they are going to find a soft spot in the Iron Dome. And it's not because the Iron Dome is ineffective, but you need to rearm and you need to resupply, or the THAAD system. You need to resupply the rockets that support those systems. And one or two of your batteries might run low. And if you shotgun attack a country with ballistic missiles and drones, you use your softer armaments first, and you deplete the defenses. And then one or two gets through, that's a soft spot. Yeah. In fact, you hear Netanyahu saying, look, he doesn't want folks to communicate where the rockets hit because of this, because that may be a location where they need to resupply. So I'm getting on these sites and I'm saying, guys, guard against hubris, because this could be a pretty significant attack. Look at what's happening. Potentially look at what could happen in the Strait of Hormuz. The Houthis, who have been practicing remote controlled speedboats loaded with explosives to contest the BAM, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Red Sea. At that point, the Houthis had already contested the Red Sea for a couple of months. So everything's coming together. So Guy, when it didn't happen, when Iran stopped shooting, that's when I realized that Iran is a paper tiger. Iran does not have the strength of will or the backing of its own people or the regime. I want to make sure I caveat this. When I say Iran, I am not talking about the Iranian people. I'm talking about the Islamic Republic.
The mullahs, right?
Yeah. The Islamic Republic that's been there for 40 plus years, suppressing the freedom of its people and the liberty of its people.
Yeah.
I knew at that moment in April that they really don't have the strength of will or the backing, the regional backing, sufficient to sustain an attack. Because if they did, that's the moment. If they did, there's no advantage to waiting. And we saw the consequences of that when Israel struck, destroyed their air defenses, and now they are sitting naked with no air defense. And I want to give credit to Israel. They're a tremendously strong nation, and they're among us in a brotherhood of nations that attempts to allow maximized freedoms to the people. I am not. I give no time, attention, or quarter to arguments about Israel being an evil nation or a terrorist state. You hear some of that frustratingly even from conservative sources. That they are attempting to manipulate the United States government, all countries attempt to manipulate the United States government. All countries do that. It's in their interest. We're the most powerful country in the world.
Yeah.
And Israel is not unique in that way. However, we do share ideological foundational principles, and I think that is what people interpret our close relationship with Israel through their own lenses. But I think the first principal reason why we have such a strong relationship with Israel is because we share significant ideological worldviews in our Judeo-Christian heritage.
And our values,
Yes.
freedom. So tell me what you can, because of course I never want to get anybody in any jeopardy.
Yes.
If you were the Israeli equivalent of Ray Alexander, 5 weeks ago,
yes,
or 5 months ago, what would you have been doing in anticipation of what happened?
So 5 months ago, they certainly would have been planning this strike. They certainly would have been wargaming this strike and up arming or refreshing all of their defensive stocks, all of their THAAD missiles and their Iron Dome defensive armaments, potentially even overloading those locations. You'd be running sorties, you'd be running practice sorties, so that when you eventually do the strike, you've already run and conditioned Iran to think that it's just another exercise. Then at one point you just turn it on and you actually carry out and execute the strike. You would be signaling an interest in negotiations. You would certainly be coordinating with the United States. So on that point, do I think the United States had decisional authority in this strike? No. I think Israel, this comes down to individual autonomy all the way up to state autonomy and agency. The mistake that so many people make is that only the United States has agency, and only when we do evil things or bad things or things that don't result in positive effect. Israel absolutely has agency and has the right to protect itself against an existential threat. So do I think that speaking on behalf of Israel, if I am in your mental exercise, I would absolutely, though, coordinate with the United States, coordinate with Donald Trump. I do believe that Donald Trump was aware of the planning. Why not? You should be aware of potential contingencies.
Sure.
I do believe that Donald Trump's intentions in negotiating with Iran were good and honest. I do think he was trying to find a nonviolent, non-kinetic solution. I think he continues to this day. I think strategic ambiguity in saying that it's last hour, it's very late in the negotiations. Iran, you could have had your opportunity a couple of weeks ago. The mullahs, really the only thing they have now to negotiate with is the life of the mullah. The life of the mullahs and Fordo. They really have nothing else to negotiate with. And being late in a negotiation with Donald Trump is not a place where I would want to be, especially with the United States having the only strategic asset that could take out Fordo, one of your only remaining negotiating pieces. And I do think, so to your question, and then the United States, as the United States, I think the reason why the B-2s, we're hearing news now of the B-2s being prepared and of tankers being flown to CENTCOM, Central Command. Those weren't pre-positioned. I think that's actually evidence that we weren't somehow trying to foment this. They would have been pre-positioned. We wouldn't have caused these delays. Why not go and execute the mission? Unless you're interested in negotiation, right? Unless you're interested in a nonviolent solution to the problem. So the folks that are on the right that are trying to claim, and on the left that are trying to claim that that the Trump administration had this planned all along, that they want to, this is going to cascade in a boots on ground war. All of that is fear mongering from my perspective. And unfortunately, so I do understand though, I do understand people are operating off of heuristics. They're operating off of the last 40 years or 30 years.
The last 2 wars, right? The last 2 wars.
Exactly. Yes. So to 2 generations back, Gen X, my generation, Gen Z, the folks who are sort of in adulthood now, and not, advanced adulthood, have, and folks, the boomer generation,
Yeah.
have all witnessed these last 40 years, 30 years worth of war. So they've developed this heuristic that every war will be a forever war. They have, and then of course they've been underinformed about the different levels of warfare and about, yes, you're using a military asset to execute a strike, but that doesn't constitute a full-blown war. There is a difference between being at peace and being at full-blown war with boots on ground.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you, and I also push back on, like you say, the right, because they like to make it look like, oh, we're in disarray and we're fighting
Yeah.
against each other and so on.
Yeah.
My answer is, if you would have asked me when Iraq War happened, I would have said fragmented country, 3 sects that are in there with
Yeah.
a bunch of minorities.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. Whereas here you're looking at homogenous people,
Yeah.
mostly, with an evil regime at the top,
Yeah.
and an amazing diaspora,
Yeah.
that can immediately come back and help.
Absolutely.
So when people make these, you're right. There's this funny thing. I'm part French, right? We always fight the last war.
Yeah.
The people on our side are actually fighting as you say, the last war, the heuristics.
Yes.
So I think your point is very, very well taken.
Yeah.
And with regards to the prep that you're mentioning, again, if we had, you would have, or your equivalents would have been activated much sooner than a week ago.
Yes.
If in fact we were going to be in this. So
yes.
Okay. So again, this has been so much fun. It's just, we'll have to do more of this. And where do you live now?
In Oklahoma. I live
Oklahoma?
a small town outside of Oklahoma.
If you come to Nevada at all for whatever reason, or if I go in that direction, we have to get together.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to.
You forgot to mention your Alameda post, because I'm an Alameda Hornet.
Oh, wow.
That's my home. If I have a hometown in the United States, it's Alameda. I came when I was 15.
Yeah, that base, we actually trained out of that base, one of my reserve units.
It was a big part of it. It was a big part of our city at the time, and of course we were proud of it. And the USS Enterprise was there, and
beautiful place, right across the bay from San Francisco. Beautiful.
So I will give you a very quick anecdote about my logistics work.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if you saw that in my background, but I was involved in the civil war between the Lebanese Christian militias versus the PLO at the time.
Wow.
1975. I was 15 years old, and I actually did commando training and volunteered to fight. My first job was logistically. I was in charge of taking sandwiches and food and water to the 5 outposts that we had right on the front.
Wow. Yes.
The thought was, let's have the kid have an easy mission.
Yeah.
But it was the opposite. I was being sniped from one place to the other. And every place that I showed up, they were fighting. So anyway, that was my logistics. That was my logistics work. I was a sandwich guy.
We have to talk more about that when we get together.
I was a Subway guy.
Yeah.
So yes, we will have to talk about this. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, sir.
And everything you told us today is so crucial and so important for people to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that you actually went outside of the box and got into a little bit of the policy issues and the intentions and how nations think. And again, the work that you had done in Saudi, which people forget that this is they happen to be our allies with regards to Iran, and how Iran lost the window. And yes, I used to think obviously Hezbollah was I thought they were powerful until it turned out they were a paper tiger as well.
Yes.
So it's interesting how these things always turn out until somebody, you can be the most muscled guy in the world until somebody punches you in the mouth.
In the face. Yeah, that Mike Tyson quote.
And then
everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Exactly. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I think that's going to be incredibly helpful for people that are going to listen to this. I encourage people to come to our sites. And of course, we're now friends on X, and we're going to be, I hope, friends in the real world.
Yes, sir.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yes, sir. Very, very great to talk to you, Guy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, and God bless, and enjoy that family and the boys and everything. So
yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.